Start off by welcoming everybody and thanks for attending. This is not a sales event. I always like to start out with that. This is more of an education and mastermind meetup of sorts. Education, support, and empowerment are core pillars of our company, and we genuinely love helping people, especially in the field of advisory and cash flow. There's so much that we feel we can impart on people, and we also feel there's so much that we can learn as more people hop in on these calls and kind of share what they know and their experiences. There's a lot of power in community, so that's what these events are about. It's about joining in and conversing and sharing our stories and kind of helping everybody out as part of that. So this is a recurring event. We put it on every 2 weeks. We're hoping as we grow it and more people join, it'll be a great place for accountants and bookkeepers and other professionals to learn key ideas for helping their clients through cash flow advisory and other forms of advisory, because you can take these learnings and put them in other areas of your practice. Again, the whole point of this is to be interactive and collaborative, asking peers questions, connecting, and just generally speaking, leveling up, so to speak. So we always ask if you know of anybody that you think that could benefit or might want to participate in these calls. Please like and share any of our posts, whether it's on my LinkedIn profile, Twitter, or on our company profiles. We are sharing snippets of these as well as just posts around upcoming events. So please like and share them. The more, we fundamentally believe the more people on here, the better. The last 2 weeks ago, session was actually quite good. Had a really good discussion at the end, and that's what we really want to have. So agenda for these events are pretty straightforward. We usually have a core education topic that lasts anywhere between 15 and 30 minutes. Today's topic, we're going to talk about how bookkeepers can move from traditional bookkeeping to outsourced controllership and what that might look like. And we'll be open to questions throughout the session, but we'll have an interactive Q&A at the very end when the floor is open, and anyone with further insights or questions can kind of share what they know. So generally speaking, we try to keep these to less than an hour. We usually try to hit around that 40 to 45 minute mark, just respecting people's time, especially right now because it's April and it is good old tax season. So hopefully everybody's faring well up there as well. This is very much still a grassroots initiative. So if you have any feedback, please let us know. Generally speaking, the format's been pretty consistent. Haven't had a lot of people say we should switch stuff up, so we've kept it this way for now. But if you think of any ways that we can improve on it or do anything that you might think might be better, we're definitely open for improvement. So moving on to announcements. Cash Flow Advisory Live, the next session will be April 27th, so 2 weeks from now. We also have a Outsourced Controller Bootcamp that we're putting on along with Kelly Parks, Mark Wickersham, and Veen. And that'll be on May 4th. It's going to be a half-day learning event. Hopefully my marketing people aren't going to jump on me. I don't know if I'm saying stuff I shouldn't be right now, but we do have an event on May 4th. So just keep an eye out for that if you're interested in it. Again, it's going to be a half-day education event on how to price, implement, and deliver outsourced financial controller services. So we get asked a lot for these live sessions where people can find recordings. We're putting these on our YouTube channel, snippets as well as the full sessions. So please go to YouTube, look up our Helm YouTube channel, and you'll see any of our past recordings on there if you want to check them out. We're also putting them on a lot of audio platforms like Spotify. So that's it for announcements. And we'll roll right into the main content session, how bookkeepers can move from traditional bookkeeping services to outsourced controllership. And I'd like to kind of start out by saying, really, this discussion kind of came about from the last Cash Flow Advisory live session that we had when we were talking. I noticed Selena just put up the YouTube link there. So last time we had our Cash Flow Live discussion, we had a really good session at the very end, and somebody asked how bookkeepers could try to upsell or cross-sell cash flow forecasting services to existing clients. And it was a really great question. It prompted a lot of dialogue. Kind of the dialogue went to a whole lot of different places after that, but it made us think about another value-add conversation that we could have. And one of the results of that was, how can we talk about a bookkeeper or bookkeeping firm best transitioning from traditional bookkeeping services to what we call outsourced controllership services, and what that progression might look like. We thought that would be pretty helpful for people out there. So I think before we really get into it, we want to define what bookkeeping and controllership is, and that way we can clearly lay out exactly what a progression might look like and how you might get there. So again, keeping in mind that I know everybody here is professional, so we're speaking on very, very layman, simple terms, but bookkeeping in a very basic and traditional sense is a process of recording and organizing all of the transactions that run through a business. And in a typical outsourced setting, that really means that bookkeepers are recording receipts, entering sales earned, handling payroll, processing and remitting sales taxes. Whereas when you look at controllership, a lot of people have questions around what that is. Some people ask if it's fractional CFO, is it the same as that? We really define controllers as people that typically are tasked with ensuring the proper functioning of a business's accounting system. And we don't mean just software in this case. Controllers really ensure that the business itself is running as efficiently as it possibly can. So a controller really helps answer questions like, is there enough money in the bank? Are customers paying on time? If customers aren't paying on time, how is that affecting financial plans? And is a business meeting its near-term strategic goals? That's really what a controller does. And so when you're looking at these definitions, you can really see that bookkeeping is very much transactional in nature, like true bookkeeping. And I appreciate that people that are really in bookkeeping and great at it, they actually are probably already fractional controllers to a degree. But we're just trying to keep definitions here so we can walk through progression. So bookkeeping is very much transactional in nature, with the bulk of the work resting in data processing, whereas controllership is much more managerial in nature. So steps to becoming a traditional bookkeeping service to an outsourced controller have to follow that path as well. You have to go from transactionally based services to more managerial based services. And so if our starting point is bookkeeping, you're being hired to help process transactions, we can simplify that transition to an outsourced controller in 3 steps. And the first step would be moving from traditional bookkeeping and then moving to owning and managing the whole bookkeeping process itself. You would then move on to utilizing that accounting function that you're owning and managing to helping the business plan out its future course. So think budgets and forecasts. And then the final step beyond that would be reporting back how the business is doing on those budgets and forecasts relative to actual performance. And if you're doing all of those services, if you're performing all of those core functions through that progression, you are truly ensuring the proper functioning of a business's accounting system and the business itself, which by our definition of what a controller is, that's exactly what you should be doing. Now, to me, this is where it gets really interesting. The hard part of this progression isn't actually the technical aspects. Most people that are on this live session that are listening are professionals, and you probably already know how to make budgets or forecasts, and you definitely know how to manage the bookkeeping process. And so technical skills are not really an issue on the progression. It's usually more of a mind shift that we see as being the real hurdle to becoming a true fractional controller or outsourced controller. And to us, or at least to me, the real problem is that professionals, I myself am one, in accounting are continually trained to look at past data, provide hard quantifiable deliverables. And when you look again at what the definition of a controller is, controllers are supposed to be more future focused and more managerial in nature. And those two things really are juxtaposed. They don't really go well together. And so to become that controller, you really do need to become into that more management mindset. You really need to understand what's truly valuable to your client. And that is much more subjective, and it's much more intangible than what we are typically trained for. And that's really what the core problem is, in my opinion, in terms of progressing to outsourced controllership. And so when it comes to understanding, knowing what is truly valuable to your clients, there's 2 things that I like to talk about and 2 things that we see with professionals that are kind of holding them back. It's more mindset issues than anything else. So the first mindset issue that I want to discuss before we get into the steps in detail on how to progress to outsourced controllership is static deliverables. What is a static deliverable? In the most simple terms, a static deliverable is a process or a service offering that is being carried out simply to satisfy a client request. It's just checking off a box. And so a quick example, near and dear to my heart at least, is a simple cash flow forecast. You can create a simplified cash flow forecast from the last 12 months of accounting data and provide this as a spreadsheet to a client for review. The process itself is pretty straightforward to carry out. I'm not saying it's quick or easy, but it's straightforward to do. And in a general sense, it satisfies a client need. If they're looking for a forecast, you simply go into your accounting system, pull the data, create it, produce it, and you're done. And so it's really easy for us as professionals to think exactly that. It's really easy to consider that job done upon delivery of that forecast. But that's what I like to call a static deliverable trap. And the reason for that is because the real question we should be asking ourselves is, what did the client actually want from the cash flow forecast? You know, maybe they wanted some advice around how their business should be proceeding in the future. Perhaps they wanted some suggestions on cost savings on an ongoing basis. Or maybe they wanted to know what different scenarios might look like. Maybe they've got a new revenue line or a new division coming out that they needed help with. And if we as professionals haven't answered that core need, you know, those questions that the client is asking, we haven't actually delivered anything of value. Even though we've given them a forecast that we spent time and effort on, we haven't actually done a true job. The job actually isn't done because from the client's perspective, their needs haven't been satisfied. And that's why we like to call it a static deliverable trap. Because even though we've given something, it doesn't mean that from the client's perspective, the full deliverable was actually received. And so to avoid static deliverables and the static deliverable trap, as we like to call it, you really need to do two things, in my opinion. You need to take a really big step back and appreciate precisely what your clients are facing every day. You need to know what is going on in their business and what's changing. And you need to know what's truly useful information for them, things that will actually help drive their business, whether it's operationally future looking, whatever that might be. And secondly, you need to remember to spend your time on what matters. You can spend a lot of time on modeling and forecasting and making things perfect, or you could take that time and spend it collaborating with your clients, getting to know them better and truly figuring out their needs. And of course, in my opinion, that latter is much more valuable to your client because it builds the relationship and it shows that you truly care. But it allows you to actually provide better advice because it gives you more information to help them actually run their business. And that's true value to a client. So to progress into a controller role, you really need to be providing the opposite of static deliverables. You need to be providing dynamic, collaborative, iterative processes with your client, one where the owner's continually involved and providing feedback and necessary information to you so that you can properly carry out your job. So going back to that simplified cash flow forecast, actually building a forecast that really delivers on the end need of it, the end desire of that client. And for here, it's really useful to remember the typical decision-making process. There's usually 6 steps in decision-making. 1, identify the actual problem. 2, gather information on the problem. 3, figure out potential solutions or alternatives for the problem. Actually, then step 4, assess those alternatives and different solutions. And then step 5 would be make a choice on those alternatives. And then the final step would be actually taking action. So if you and your client can quickly and efficiently do all 6 of those steps in the decision-making process within your service offering, within the functions that you're providing, then you're providing dynamic services. You know, you're not providing a static deliverable. You're literally helping the client walk through a decision-making process, and your solutions are now geared to answering the questions and the problems that are coming up in those actual decision-making processes. And if you can do that, your services are going to be light years ahead of your peers, in my opinion. And your clients will be forever grateful for it, because what we commonly see, and even in my own experience when I first started out my own firm, it was really easy to provide static deliverables. It's having those long task lists, checklists. They're great for kind of keeping jobs to be done and managing your projects, but it's also very easy to just check off a task and consider it done. And so it's really nuanced, but really focusing on the purpose of that task. You know, it's not just a checkbox you need to check off. There's something behind it. The client literally needs something out of it. They want something out of it. What is that? Really need to keep that in mind. So let's shift to the second mindset issue we see. This one I call reactive deliverables, and reactive deliverables are of course very similar to static deliverables, but they are different. And what I mean by that is you could be correctly collaborating and interacting with your clients. You could be providing a dynamic deliverable, a dynamic service, but it could still be reactive. And by that, I mean, it could still require far too much client input for it to be properly carried out to completion, for you to be able to carry it out to completion without it. And I always love to use bill payment services as an example here, where you and your team are handling your client's accounts payable. Now, it's not to say that you have to do this in order to be proactive and dynamic in everything that we're talking about. This is just an example. But if you're doing the accounts payables process for your client all the way to actual payment processing, this could be a fully interactive and collaborative process. But if you're still asking questions of your client, like, when would you like to pay this bill? You're actually not offering a proactive service. You're actually offering a reactive process. Putting it another way, you can't fully own and manage this particular function, in this case, a bill pay service, because your client just still needs to put in too much time and effort of their own in the decision-making process in order for you to actually complete it all the way. And so it's still very much reactive. It's heavily reliant on the client to provide that input. And so to eliminate reactive deliverables, you really need solid systems and processes in place, as well as, again, an in-depth understanding of your client's business. Again, looking at the bill payment example, you need to advance your knowledge of the client to a point where you can provide suggestions to them. So if you can sit there and go to your client and you know which vendors are a priority, what are the terms of each vendor, who's the squeaky wheel that's continually bugging them. If you have that information, you can make more decisions on behalf of your client. You can do it for them. And then that means your client has less to think about and less to do in the process. And therefore the process itself is then less reactive. It's much more proactive. Of course, gaining this level of knowledge requires two things. It requires a lot of time, and you need to take a lot of time to understand the business, learning its processes, its key customers, its key vendors, key pain points, all of that fun stuff. But not only that, you actually need to also take a lot of time to get to know the business owner themselves. And while the business has its own nuances and key pain points, you're also talking to a human, the small business owner here, that has their own complexities that can be different from the company itself. And you need to know what's important to them at a personal level in order to provide advice that genuinely resonates with them. So you need to be spending a lot of time getting to know the business and the business owner itself. And this can be done over two different timeframes. It can be done over the very short term, or it can be done over the long term. And in the short term, I mean, maybe you've got an onboarding process or a half-day or day-long session with your client or questionnaires. But it's really good to spend some time getting to know your client and their clients' business right out of the gates. So giving them questionnaires, doing process mapping, reviewing their business plans, anything you can do right away to learn as much as is possible about your client is extremely useful. And then over the long term, you can gain more information about your client and their business over time, really gaining an understanding of the inner workings as a business and as a person at a deeper level. But in either case, we're talking about time here. So I really want to point out, and we talk about this a lot in terms of any live session, really value your time, because if you try to compete too much in terms of price on your services, you simply won't have enough margin to have the time to actually then understand your client and ultimately provide the service, the advisory service that you need to for your client. So we speak about it a lot make sure you really value your time so that you can properly understand and build relationships and all of that fun stuff. And of course, in saying that, it's really easy to say, charge more. That's kind of the answer to everybody's problems these days, but it's really good to remind ourselves the value proposition from the client. In this case, we talked about value propositions even on the last cash flow live sessions, because it's easier for us to forget the value proposition and think that there isn't a lot of value. But if you remember that what we're calling reactive services versus proactive services, in terms of bookkeeping and accounting, are exactly the same from our perspective. There's only one difference between them, and that's taking that one final step further, where we provide our own advice, insight, and knowledge to the actual end output. And this is gleaned from our own experience and knowledge of the business. That's the only key difference between reactive and proactive services. It's a small step, but that single additional step from the client's perspective provides a huge amount of incremental value. If you want to step back and look at things from a 10,000-foot view, the client gets with reactive services an offering where they're continually hounded to dig up receipts, explain spending patterns, decide vendor priority, payment priorities, this, that, the other. Or they could have a proactive service offering where you are using your knowledge and insights to take away a lot of that pain. And the client then gets an offering where they're rarely hounded and they're simply asked for final approval on a well laid out plan. And the only key difference between those two is our input. One has it and one doesn't. Reactive being the one that doesn't, and proactive obviously the one that does. And every business person I know is insanely busy. And so there's no real question about which service offering has more value. The proactive services, in my opinion, win by a landslide because they take so much pressure off the actual business owner. And it's not just pressure, it's also they're gaining insight and advice and expertise in an area that they probably don't have expertise in. And so looking at the value proposition, could you charge an extra 10 grand a month for this? No, probably not unless it's a really big client and a really big company. But could you charge an extra $200 a month, $500, $1,000 per month? Those numbers are not a stretch at all for proactive services because of the pain that you're taking away from the client. But again, keep in mind, the real point here is that you're not actually adding a ton of time and effort on your own side. You're simply taking the expertise out of your brain and adding it onto the process. And that's what adds the real value to the whole process for the client. So don't shortchange yourself. Really try to get away from valuing the time and value your expertise, because if you can do that, that gives you more time and capacity because you've got greater margins. You can actually spend the time that you need to understanding, again, your client, their actual personality, and you can gauge your service offerings appropriately. So those are the two mindset issues that we see a lot. So hopefully after having walked through what we call static deliverables and reactive deliverables, you can see that really the key issue here is perception and framing things properly from the eyes of the client more than anything else. And if you can make the mental mindset shift and frame things up appropriately, you can quickly make the transition from a bookkeeper to an outsourced controller. Again, the technical skills are there, and if they're not, they can be quickly learned or easily picked up. The tricky part is that mindset shift more than anything else. So if we rewind a bit and we go through the steps from bookkeeper to outsourced controller in a little more detail, might have a little more context now with these mindset differences that we're talking about. So remember that traditional bookkeeping is where you're really only processing the data. That's our starting point. With your experience and your skill, and now by taking the time to truly know your client and their business, and really truly understanding the value and what drives them, it's really easy to progress to the second step of what we're calling outsourced controllership, where you're managing the entire bookkeeping process itself. And here, what we're talking about is you will be telling the client which software systems they should use and implement to improve their business processes. You would also be building and telling them step-by-step procedures required of every person in the business in order to get financial information produced quickly, efficiently, and in a timely manner. And we're still operating in the bookkeeping wheelhouse. There's a really big shift here in how we're talking, and that really rests in who is controlling this accounting function, hence the term controller. And it's really important to note here that to progress to the controllership role, you need to be providing the ultimate vision and plan. That is the difference. You are the controller, and the business owner and the client is taking more of a follower role. They're following your lead. And this is a huge value add to the client so that they can focus on more operationally sensitive issues. Or depending on the person, maybe they just want to focus on other stuff. Maybe they want to have more vacation time, whatever that might be. But by you coming in and actually managing and actively managing that role, you provide them with that benefit, and that's huge. And so from this step, you can then move on to what we're calling the third step, and that's using your accounting function. Again, I use that term "your" because it's yours, to really start providing more future-looking information. So again, think budgets and forecasts. You've got sound processes in place. You've got the data quality. You simply then need to collaborate with your client more on what they expect to see happening in the business in the future, and that enables you to do the future-looking information. You need that in your accounting information. And to be clear here, I do like to point out the difference between budgets and forecasts. Budgets are what you would like to happen in the future, so setting parameters around cost controls, sales expectations, etc. Whereas forecasts are what are actually going to happen. And the easiest way to explain it is if you look at somebody's, say, advertising costs. If your client is continually blowing through their budgets, they're overspending relative to their budget, there's no point in forecasting this amount moving forward. It's not going to be hit until it's contained or some solution's been made around it. But until that happens, there's no point in continually budgeting it out. And that's why you should be forecasting. That's the only difference really between the two. And that's why forecasts are usually more frequent and a little more important to business owners. So whether you call it a budget or a forecast, people use them interchangeably, but there is a key difference. But to a business owner, the forecasts are a lot more important because they show what's actually going to happen. They provide a more accurate picture of what reality is going to be. And so again, in this step, you can see how having dynamic and proactive relationships with your clients is really what matters. You can easily create a budget and a forecast from the past data in the accounting system, but does it incorporate any new plans for the future? Because those are not housed in an accounting system. And better yet, have you learned enough about the client through your past learnings, those questionnaires, spending time with them, just generally asking them questions? Do you have enough knowledge to actually build out those future plans in the budgets and the forecasts for your clients so they don't have to provide the input? If you can, you are providing highly proactive dynamic services, and you're quickly becoming a very indispensable member of their team because you're saving them so much work and so much effort. And again, this comes back to you providing your insight and your advice into the process and actually owning it and managing it. That's again the key difference between anything that we're doing here. As a controller, you are owning that entire process. You are the manager. So it's very important to really start thinking that way. Once you have your budgets and your forecasts in place for your client, you can then move on to the final step in the progression, and that's reporting on progress of the business relative to the forecasts and the budgets. And interestingly enough, in terms of the requirements of work here, it's fairly straightforward. There's a lot of work in terms of variance analysis that you can do, budgets to actuals. And you can also do a lot of forecast updates. So again, taking, say, that advertising overspend and showing them what life looks like with that continuing into the future, and providing them context about what they can do. There's usually much less involvement from the client in this step, and it relies more on you and your dynamic and proactive services at this point. And if you can do that, there's a lot of room for feedback and advice that you can provide here. There's a lot of value that you can generate. Again, using an example of the client and the overspending, if your client can see where they're heading, they know that they need to change something in the short or medium term to right the ship, so to speak. And hopefully at this point, you're starting to provide suggestions to actually help them get there. And if you can do that, that's tremendously valuable to your client. So interestingly enough, this step also provides a lot of value to you, the practitioner, because going through the whole exercise of comparing budgets to actuals, creating, forecast updates, guiding the client in terms of things that could be done, those conversations all lead to more information and more knowledge and insight that you have about the business and the people behind it. And you can use that in essentially a feedback loop to then generate better information and better advice for your client in the future. So it's a little bit of a self-feeding cycle. And so essentially, if you've progressed through all of these steps, those 3 steps, your service line will now be fitting the true bill of what we're calling controllership, because you're now essentially the financial steward for your client's business. You're literally handling and managing their business affairs day to day on your own. They are not. And it's good to note here that we've moved from bookkeeper to outsourced controller, and the reality is that the bookkeeping could be done by anyone at this point in time. Once you've gotten to that outsourced controller role, you can employ another person in your own practice. The client could employ another bookkeeper because maybe it's more cost effective, or maybe they go find another third party. This is all possible as long as you're still owning and managing the accounting function from end to end. The question really isn't who's doing the actual bookkeeping work. That's less important now. What's really important is, are they following your processes and procedures? Because again, you are the controller. It's your function, and everybody should be working within your structure. And so those are our steps for becoming an outsourced controller. Of course, there's loads of topics that can kind of come off the back of this discussion, like how do you price this? How do you market it? How do you implement them actually from a technical standpoint? But again, as I said at the outset, we're trying to keep these to that 45 minute mark, respecting people's time. So we'll cut it there, trying to be cognizant of not covering too much on any given day. And so that's our main learning session. We'll now move on to open Q&A. So I would love to know if anybody has any questions about what we talked about, and go from there. Or not. Any questions? No? So I'll throw one out there. I know that just looking at the list of people that are out there, I know there's quite a few bookkeepers that are on this call. So I would like to know, any of the bookkeepers that are out there, do you already provide a lot of controllership services through your existing bookkeeper work? What we've defined as controllership services. I'm going to pick on you, Deb.
Sure.
So do you feel like you provide controllership services already? Because I feel like that could be something that could become an interesting discussion point.
Yeah, as you were mentioning some of the things, I was like, oh, well, I already do that for a couple of clients. They're kind of MIA most of the time, and I'm just making sure that things are getting done and bills are paid and that sort of thing. So as you said, the mindset, I'm like, oh yeah, okay. I am doing it.
Well, and I think it's really important to point that out, because again, I'm sure, knowing a few names that are on this call, I know people have the technical skill sets. And so the question really comes down to, which is why I prompted it, are people already offering it, and are they valuing it properly? So like when you're saying that you're doing some of this work for your client, what I hear as an outsider looking in is you are providing controllership services. Like you just literally mentioned that your client is MIA and their ship still runs.
Yeah.
And so you are helping steer the boat. And so do you charge quote unquote bookkeeper rates for that, or do you charge differently for that?
Yeah, well, now that we've talked about it, I'm like, I got to go revisit this. I think I need to raise some rates.
Yeah. Do you think your client would value it differently if you had a bit of a different, essentially a marketing position with them? Like you're presenting the value proposition to them more, saying, hey, like you have the ability to do this. If you went to somebody else, it might not be that easy. Do you think that would make that discussion easier?
Yes, definitely, because they've already, on more than one occasion have, in fact, one has commented several times how I've saved his butt, literally. So
yeah,
I don't think it would be a difficult conversation to say, look, you need to pay for this. So
yeah. And I think having things structured and laid out, we got onto the topic of value propositions. I'm pretty sure it was in our last cash flow advisory live conversation, but we talked about value props, and I really wanted to make sure we highlight that because working on the software side now, you get into a lot of marketing and positioning and really making sure your value statements come across to the people that you talk to. And I think that's one thing that we as professionals do really poorly. Like I even know from when we're still doing it poorly in my firm now. And there's so many things that we could be doing better. And of course, if you're not positioning yourself properly, you're undervaluing yourself because, it leads to scope creep. So you start doing things that are highly valuable. Our clients can literally disappear and their business finances still work. And we're probably not charging enough for that.
Yeah.
So it's a really important topic, I think.
Yeah. Well, and it's just one of those things that just kind of one day it's like, oh, wait a minute. I am doing all of this. I've just been doing it, but kind of, as someone else in the chat said, had that aha moment where I was like, whoa.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, Jeanette, I think she's talking about you because you were saying in the comments here that you had an aha moment regarding bookkeeping and controllership. I do it all and do it both, and it's both time consuming and stressful. So are you meaning that you also have some clients that you're kind of like Deb, where you're doing some controllership work already and maybe not charging appropriately? And again, I don't want to come across, because a lot of pricing gurus out there really come across as just charge more. And I want to be clear that I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it's also really easy for us as practitioners to not value ourselves. And so if we're looking at some of these bigger entities out there that are commoditizing bookkeeping, your insight and your advice is the difference maker. It's truly what drives your value that people cannot get at these bigger shops. It just doesn't exist. So do you have similar experience to Deb in terms of a little bit of scope creep maybe?
You're muted, Jeanette.
I think you're muted.
There. Absolutely. I have one client in particular, and I kind of identify with Deb. I do it all. And yeah, absolutely. There's many times I know it is valued and I've been told it's valued, and then it's not valued. So I've got to wrap my head around how I'm going to approach this, because I really did when I saw the kind of the difference in the split between the controllership and the bookkeeping. Yeah, without a doubt, the value that I provide is undervalued, and then I'm agreeing with it. So I think I'm my own worst enemy.
No, but it's hard, and that's why I say, when people always ask us in terms of advisory is such a mysterious word. It can mean so many things, and you can be a tax advisor, you can be a business advisor. There's so many forms of it. People here are professionals, and whether you've got a designation or not, it doesn't matter. You've got practical experience, you have knowledge that you've built over time, or you've got some education or background, or you've got both. And it's like the technical skill set is there. And that's why I think it's really important to really highlight the mindset shift, which is why I love the bill pay conversation. Because even if you're not doing that service, I think it highlights it so succinctly, where it's like, I can have a client and I can be doing bill pay services, but if I continually am asking them, when do you want to pay it? You're not really controlling or managing, like you're not providing enough insight. And it means you probably don't have enough knowledge about the business to even know, which then means it's not actually valuable to the client. It's not that it's not, but it's much more of a commodity. And it's such a small little step, and everybody's got, I guess my point is everybody's got the technical expertise as well as that knowledge. It's just that mindset shift from point A to point B and really wrapping your head around that.
Well, and I feel the word advisory is maybe not the right word either, because, you know, again, in the case of these couple of clients, I don't feel that I'm advising them. I'm just making sure that things are getting done, you know, like I'm after the fact going, you know, hey, this got paid and you know, this has been looked after and you know, I've saved your butt again. So, you know, it's not that I'm I don't feel like I'm advising them. I'm just getting the stuff done.
Yep. And I think that's a very interesting point, because, you know, when I'm saying that advisory is an interesting word, that's kind of what I mean. It means different things to different people.
Yeah.
If you are giving somebody the ability to not really have to worry about their finances in any, like you save their butt multiple times, I mean, that's hugely valuable. And that, I guess my point of advisory is it's anything that isn't like true basic necessary evil. Anything beyond that could be considered advisory. So whatever you want to call it, you know, call it something, because hopefully that something's got a higher value attachment in your mind, which helps you reframe some of the discussions that you have with clients and what life looks like.
Yeah.
Just reading some other notes here. So Catherine was asking, how would you state a value prop around this service? My apology if this has been covered before. I think that actually kind of speaks to what we were just talking about, which is in Deb's case, she's got clients that she's actually actively managing, or at least that's what it sounds like. They're not just data entry, like not just technical bookkeeping, but she's literally helping manage their business. You know, she's helping saving their butts, so to speak. And so from a value prop standpoint, that's what you want to highlight, because that is highly valuable to every business owner I know. They want to focus on their services or their widgets or not. You know, some people value their time and they just want to spend less time in their business. So truly understanding what's valuable to them is how you want to then position your value prop. So you want to know their emotional pain point so that you can kind of describe your service offering better to them. So in Deb's case, if this client wants that flexibility, truly values that flexibility of her just simply taking the load off them, that is the value prop. So then it's just talking to them more about that and then trying to highlight that position. Deb, and giving you client X the ability to not worry about this anymore. If you went to competitor ABC, you would not be able to get that, because not that, you know, the industry is bad, but my experience has been, we get a lot of clients coming in the door that say, I'm getting a bare minimum. And what I just heard is Deb is not providing the bare minimum. Deb's going above and beyond. And that's the value prop. And so it's really just figuring out what resonates with your clients. And so this is why I said this discussion could get into a lot of different topics. You know, from a marketing perspective, it's really good to know who you want to target and having what they would call an ideal client profile. So if you're in the e-commerce space, just as an example, or construction, to pick a more traditional service, if you've got a lot of construction clients, they probably have a lot of the same emotional pain points. Given that it's construction, it's probably not getting paid, because that's what happens in construction. So a value proposition for a construction client would be, you know, Deb, can help you take away the pain and frustration of not getting paid. I can do the follow-up. I can do this. You can worry about going and building the next house, the next project, this, that, the other. That's a very different conversation than saying, I can do your bookkeeping. And so that's the value prop. Like, the value prop's really speaking to the benefit of your client. And so it can be a lot. And I know that's not the best answer, but it's more really learning your clients. And it's not to say that you should be niching, like maybe you don't have construction clients, maybe you've got 50 clients that are all different, but you should know what their emotional pain points are, like what really drives them and what are they really frustrated with. And if you know that, you can frame your service offering to them appropriately. So that value prop can be quite a bit of different things. It really is dependent on the person, the client on the other end. I don't know if that helped you, Catherine. Just got a question here from AJ, or a comment. I've been trying to determine my options to evolve my bookkeeping relationship with a couple of my clients. Seems I've been doing more bookkeeping, but didn't realize it. No more guilt about what I'm charging. These sessions are expanding my vocabulary so that I can better express to my clients. That's the value that I bring. So I guess that's a good positive comment. Thank you, AJ. Tell the world, we want more people. And I think that's it. Catherine's noting that advisor is becoming a regulated word. For example, in the investment world, certain designations now require you to hold yourself out as an advisor. 100%, there's definitely some regulation going on, but advisory is still used fairly loosely, I think, in the bookkeeping and accounting world. You know, everybody knows the whole spiel. Don't be a commodity, be an advisor. Do better. And that's the whole point of these cash flow live sessions is what does that actually mean? Because, you know, it is so loose and it is so open, and there's a lot of marketing speak and not a lot of practical how to, and that's why I love these discussions, even this discussion with Deb and Jeanette. Like, I think it's great to have this feedback from other people just to see how they're feeling and what they're kind of going through as well. So are there any other questions that people have, or any other things that, issues that maybe people want to poke about? Nope. All right. Well, I think we'll probably leave it at that. That's 10 minutes to the hour, so that's well within our goal target. So thank you very much. Yeah. Marketing has put up our Outsourced Controller Bootcamp on May 4th. There's the link for it. So thank you. I was actually just about to go into my announcements again. Next cash flow advisory live session is April 27th. So 2 weeks from now. Again, just reiterating, these are being put on YouTube. So if there are sessions that you want to review, they are on YouTube, as well as Spotify and Apple Podcasts at some point in time. So please watch our social media accounts. We're regularly posting this stuff. And again, I would love it if people are getting benefit out of this. Like, please share it, because again, the more community that we can get here, I think the better these discussions will become. And as our marketing department put up there, we've got an Outsourced Controller Bootcamp on May 4th. This is a half-day online event. It's an education session where you can learn how to price, implement, like physically implement workflow process-wise, and deliver what we're saying high-fee, high-value outsourced controllership services. So please click on that link or reach out to us if you want more information on that. I think it'll be a really good session. Lots to learn, and pretty excited about offering it. So thanks everybody for coming. I really like these events. It's a lot of fun just connecting with people and picking people's brains and dialoguing back and forth. So hopefully everybody else is getting some good value out of it too. And I hope everybody is surviving tax season.